If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what's the spookiest/scariest moment of your life? This is pretty long, so bear with me. I keep my drum kit in my basement. It's a pretty thin basement, so the drums usually make a decent amount of noise. One day, while I was playing, I started to feel something on my ear. I stopped playing and I started to hear whispering really close to me. I got pretty freaked out and noped upstairs. The next day, I got home from school and went downstairs to play again, only to notice that all of the basement lights were on. It was pretty weird for that to happen, but I just assumed somebody left the lights on. I started playing and heard the whispering again. This time I said, "Hello? Is anyone there?" And the whispering stopped. Didn't hear anything for the rest of the day. Parents get home and I tell them to make sure they turn the lights off when they leave. About a week later, I go to play drums again, to find myself back in the basement with all of the lights turned on. So I say, "Alright, you got me. You can stop now." Whenever I finished playing my drums, I went upstairs and every single chair from the kitchen was in front of the basement doorway, blocking my way out. Pretty fucking creepy, but I haven't had anything weird happen since. I saw in the title spookiest followed by scariest, and I immediately started humming the tune to Spooky Scary Skeletons in my head. Anyway, I don't think I've ever had any really scary moments. The worst I can think of happened when I was a kid, probably 8 or 9, on a residential with school. This was probably just overactive childhood imaginations, but it was scary nonetheless. We were staying in this creepy old mansion type house in Derbyshire, in the north of England, that had been converted into a youth hostel and must have been about 400 years old. As soon as our coach pulled up outside this place, I was a bit creeped out by it, and it only got more creepy as it got dark. While I was eating dinner, I needed to use the bathroom, and the only one I could remember was near our rooms, all the way up on the second floor. The dinner hall was on the ground floor. So I made my way up the 2 flights of stairs alone, and headed down the corridor towards the bathroom. The entire floor was deserted and really creepy, and I got this horrible feeling of knowing something scary was about to happen. I was thinking to myself, how creepy would it be if a light just turned on by itself, when I heard a loud click, and out of the corner of my eye I saw one of the other rooms light up. I turned and ran, practically jumping both flights of stairs and probably making it back to the dinner hall in 30 seconds. The scary thing is that I knew I was the only one up there. Our school had all the rooms on that floor, and everyone in the class was in the dinner hall when I got back down. After numerous other events had happened to nearly everyone, we were all convinced this place was haunted. The teachers actually sat us down and gave us this lecture on how they wouldn't take us to somewhere if it was haunted, because everyone was so scared. Backpacking last year, I woke up to a black bear trying to get my food out of the tree. I whispered to my father in his tent, "What's going on?" At this point, I'm zipped back up in my tent. For some fucking reason he yells at it, and I hear a 300-pound thump from the bear jumping out of the tree. He tells me to get out of the tent. As I do, the bear is walking toward us. About 15 feet away. He sees me. Hesitates and takes another step forward. He glances back at the food bag and I stand up. I raise my hands up and start yelling. He didn't care. We stare at each other for what felt like an eternity. He eventually decided we were too much to fight and walked about 30 feet to the edge of the woods and watched us pack up for about 20 minutes. Probably will get buried, but it still affects me to this day. I spent my late teen years growing up in Vail, Arizona. There's miles upon miles of untamed desert and wild animals. We have this eerie road that leads into Vail/Corona, and it's called Houghton. Pitch black, not one street light. Anyways, my buddy had just graduated high school and was ready to have some fun. So he gets home from his graduation dinner, changes, and starts driving out to his friend's house in Vail. He's cruising down Houghton when he sees this tall, lanky silhouette cross the street. He keeps driving until it stops dead in the middle of the road, and he slams on his brakes. The thing is a good 5 feet from his bumper. He starts to feel panicked and honks the horn, thinking it's some drunk. It won't budge. He honks a few more times and revs up his engine. Then the thing looks directly at him and, as he said, he burst into tears. The closest feeling he could relate it to was pure, unfiltered anxiety. A few minutes after, the thing slunk back into the desert. My buddy sped off to his friends, and once he was able to calm down, he described what he had seen. It was unnaturally tall, thin, and had elongated fingers. Its skin was almost fuzzy looking, like when you get a smudge on your camera and take a picture. He said he couldn't describe the face out of pure shock, but he says he remembers the eyes being freakishly small. Fast forward 2 months, my boyfriend, now ex, is driving me home. We take a right on this dirt road to get to Houghton, and as his headlights beam over a fence I see something. It had this odd gait, almost as if it was limping. It was hunched and had its back to me. Its skin was almost brownish gray in color. The one thing I remember the most was its height and eerily long arms. I instantly burst into tears and screamed for my boyfriend to keep driving. He yelled too and sped off. I was so frightened I woke up my mother once I got home and told her about it. To this day I'm horrified of the desert at night. I have a handful of stories involving this spunky creature and sightings from other people around Vale. They call it the Valian. Mine was more of paranoia than anything else. When I was a kid I spent a lot of time at home. We lived in a big house, so I would usually look out the window and just watch the wildlife. Well, eventually I start to notice that there are always a bunch of crows that would hang out in front of the house. Being little I thought it was cool, but there was always something strange when all but 2 of the crows would leave and the 2 just stay at our front yard. Later I found out that the previous owner who built the house had 2 daughters that were murdered in front of the house. So being little I was creeped out even when I would go to my dad's or out of town I would always see 2 crows where I was. Then one day I get a call that my dog has died. Obliviously I was heartbroken, but later on I see the 2 crows again and out of the blue a third one joins them. This same thing happened when my grandfather died. Now there are always 4 crows wherever I go. I was visiting family in Erie, Pennsylvania, USA over Labor Day weekend 2005, the weekend preceding the first Monday in September, for the non-Americans. I had some time to kill, so I had lunch at a locally famous hot dog shop and then went for a leisurely drive around Prescott State Park. I had the cruise control set at just under 30 miles per hour and the radio tuned to the local classic rock station, basically just lost in my head having a completely happy and mellow drive. A little past the midway point, I watched a big pickup truck, like an F-250 or something, suddenly pull out of traffic and into a big, empty dirt and gravel parking area, gunning his engine and spinning up all kinds of dust. No big deal, I thought, just some redneck showing off. It happens all the time. He did a big loop and then made a straight line back towards the road, right into my path. I had my foot over the brake ready to stop, but he slammed on his brakes in time and stopped a few feet from my car. It was a dick move, but it happened so fast and I'd been in a really good mood, so I didn't even think to flip him off. He pulled back onto the road and immediately started tailgating me. At first I figured he was pissed I didn't hit the brakes and let him cut me off and wanted to show it, and then he rammed the back of my car, hard enough that I knew there was damage. I briefly considered pulling over, but I could see a massive dog, I'm guessing a mastiff, in the passenger seat in my rearview mirror and I decided that confronting an angry redneck and his big-ass dog by myself was not a good idea. In retrospect, a solid decision. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911. While I was talking to the dispatcher, he rammed me again hard enough that I was slammed back into the seat and saw stars. I realized then that he wasn't going away. For the next few minutes, I kept one hand on the wheel and had my phone in the other, calling out landmarks to the dispatcher so the park cops would know where we were while he repeatedly rammed me, 10 to 15 times in total. Traffic coming the other direction was steady, it was Labor Day weekend, so I didn't have an option to try to flee. At one point, he smashed into me and kept on the gas, trying to plow my car into the Jetta in front of me while I stood on the brakes. The asshole driving the Jetta just pulled over and let us pass, and then got right back on the road without ever calling anyone. Fuck that guy. At another point, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed something weird. I figured the guy was pissed at me and expected him to be road raging and animated, like hands waving or pounding on the steering wheel or something. He was calm as could be, like he was driving to grandma's house or something, but I saw that 2 fingers of his right hand were pointed sideways at an odd angle. He came at me again and I put it out of my head and worried about driving. When the traffic coming the opposite way finally cleared enough, I hit the gas and passed the 2 cars in front of me. After that he backed off and slowed way down. The dispatcher directed me to the park office, and I pulled in there, had a serious case of the shakes, and then went inside to give my statement. I heard a bit of the rest of it on the radio. He raced past the first 2 cops who tried to stop him and crashed into the third and was taken into custody. I steadied my hands as much as I could and wrote my statement, and then the arresting officer came up to talk to me. I briefly told him what happened, and then he said, it could have been worse, and reached behind his back and pulled a huge revolver from his waistband. They found it on the seat when they hauled him out of his truck. About an hour later I realized that's what I had seen when I thought I saw his fingers pointed at an odd angle. He had the gun in his hand against the steering wheel the whole time. The officer called him mental, and said he told them he was on a mission from God to kill all the baby fuckers. We took that to mean pedophiles. I finished writing my statement and drove back to my mother's house, stopping at the dive bar down the street for a double shot of Cuervo. When I called the park police for a follow-up the next day, the officer told me that he was bipolar, schizophrenic, etc., I can't remember exactly which, and had gone off his meds. He was committed and wouldn't be charged unless he left whatever program he was put into. I never heard anything further, so I'm guessing he did what he was supposed to. 2 or 3 times in the past few years I've tried a couple of internet searches on his name out of curiosity but came up empty. His insurance quickly paid to fix my car. They even sent an adjuster to meet me at work, complete with a $500 please don't sue us check. I got a crazy story out of it and an irrational fear/hatred of tailgaters. Seriously, fuck all of them, and that was the end of it. Sometimes I wonder about what happened to the guy or fantasize about beating the ever-loving shit out of him, but mostly I try not to think about it. The most common is the voices phenomena. You're hiking in the woods and you hear people talking. You pause, look around, even wait to see if there's someone coming around a switchback, but no one appears. Speaking to other outdoors types, this seems to be a pretty common occurrence. The mountains carry voices better than you'd think. Another time I was camping in Shenandoah National Park, not at a shelter or off the but in the backcountry a couple of miles from Skyline Drive. The dog tends to growl at every twig snap or woodland creature she thinks she hears. Around 2330 or so she abruptly stands up, crawls out of the sleeping bag, looks at the wall of the tent, then crawls back into the sleeping bag. About a minute later a flashlight abruptly turns on and is pointed at my tent. I hadn't heard anyone walk up no mean feat as this was in the late fall after all the leaves had fallen off, and I got out my pocket knife to prepare for my role in a slasher flick. Light turns off and straining, I tried to hear if the individual was walking off or not, but I never did. A few more times during the night the dog crawled out and repeated her stare into the night, retreat bit, but the flashlight didn't return. What's creepy about this is that she went with whoa. I'm going to be quiet about this. When she's growled at bears that have been near our tent before. I'd initially thought that it might have been a park ranger, but if the dog detected the same individual multiple times, I'm now thinking poacher. Or axe murderer. When I was 16 I still lived with my parents, obviously. I was in the habit of staying up way late into the night. One night I heard the faint but distinct sound of someone whistling. I passed it off easily as the next door neighbors, or maybe some passerby walking in front of my house. The next night I heard it again. It was clearly coming from the kitchen. I got up and looked around to investigate. Nothing was there, no lights were on, nothing out of the ordinary was happening. I again wrote it off and went to bed. 2 days later, I heard it a couple times in the space of maybe half an hour, and then again an hour later. At this point I was freaking out. I wasn't sure if I was slowly going insane or if I was being haunted. Fast forward about a week. This has been happening on and off the entire week, with some night having nothing and some nights having multiple whistles. It was always the same whistle, a faint eerie sound just at the edge of my range of hearing. I finally had enough and spent an entire night staked out in my kitchen. Nothing happened until around 1:30 a.m., when a faint whistling started. I looked around and my mom's phone had lit up. She'd just received an email. A couple years ago I was walking with a friend, middle of Florida winter, and we were about 4 miles away from home. It's around midnight, and we notice someone's been walking about 300 feet behind us for a few minutes. We jokingly call out hello to him, and he doesn't respond, just keeps on walking. We increase our pace a bit, he matches. Now, we decide to start taking corners somewhat at random to see if he keeps following us. He does. We're mildly concerned at this point. After another 30 seconds or so we pass under a streetlight and I decide to just casually observe behind us for when the guy is illuminated by it so I can at least get a decent idea of what the fella looks like. He's wearing a fucking ski mask. I fail to contain my what the fuck of surprise, grab my friend's arm, tell him to run, and drag him along behind me until he starts moving as well. The masked man gives chase. Now, it should be noted that both my friend and I were rather overweight and out of shape at the time, around 5 feet 9 inches, 200 pounds of fat. So we're running as fast as our fat legs can carry us, and we're both pretty much at our limit after a quarter of a mile, but adrenaline keeps us moving until we're basically about to pass out. It's dead silent, aside from our panting for breath. It looks like we lost the guy, and then we just hear this loud, deep laughing. I nearly shat myself right there. Never saw the guy after we started running, but holy fuck did it scare the shit out of me. On the bright side, that memory is a major factor of my decision to buck up, lose 60 pounds, and start running regularly. Because I really don't want to experience that feeling of utter vulnerability ever again. Went on a kick-ass trip to South Africa with my family, mom, dad, older brother and 2 younger sisters. We went on a 4-day safari, and each night we would stay in a little bungalow or something. Nothing fancy at all, but a roof over our heads and some running water. The last night out there we camped in tents out in the bush. My mom, dad and 2 sisters are sharing 2 tents at the top of the hill, while my brother and I had taken the one at the bottom in a dry riverbed. 3 a.m. rolls around and we are both out taking a piss when we hear this beastly, guttural noise. It got closer and closer, and me and my brother scrambled back into the tent, grabbed our knives, and just laid there terrified. We could hear this thing breathing in the night, and it was making these sounds almost like a raptor from Jurassic Park. Even after it passed, I did not sleep a wink for the rest of the night. Our guide told us the next day that it was a male lion looking for a mate. We found its paw prints about 50 yards from me and my brother's tent. I suppose. I was home alone last Easter. I get home from supper at my grandma's and sit down on the couch to watch TV. My friend came over for half an hour as he waited for his girlfriend. After he leaves, I go to leave to watch a movie with my girlfriend. Halfway down my driveway, she phones me to say she is coming to pick me up. I said okay and go stand on the deck outside waiting. My big Newfoundlander came up and I started petting her. Great dog and incredibly friendly. I am petting her and notice that she is baring her teeth, and then next thing I know she is growling. I have never seen her do that before. She is staring at my front door, so I look up and through the stained glass I can see the outline of a person as they look at me, then run away into the house. I shit a brick and ran to my car and locked myself in. My girlfriend and her friend show up and I tell them. I was freaking out and was wondering if I should call the police or my neighbor. I live on a farm, cops wouldn't be there for a while and all my neighbors have guns. My girlfriend freaks out and starts driving away while I am stuck in the back seat of her car. From the car, all 3 of us saw in the picture window the person poke their head through the curtain and watch us leave. It took me 5 to 10 minutes to convince her to go back, and then my neighbors and I searched the house. Person was already gone. The part that freaks me out was that this person was in the house with me for an hour and I had no idea. It still haunts my nightmares, and sometimes when I am home alone I get so scared that I feel paralyzed. It is terrible. One night when I was 7 or 8 I had a dream that a friend and I were being kidnapped by this old man. We were tied up and gagged in the back of this van, those stereotypical kidnap vans you see in movies, and we were parked in an empty parking lot. The kidnapper went away for a while on the phone, which gave us enough time to untie the ropes to escape. Fast forward to the next morning, my mom wakes me up and tells me to get dressed and ready to go because I had to go with her when she did errands. In the car on the way to the bank we stop at a busy intersection. There, on the corner of the sidewalk, is the old man from my dream. I don't know if it was because I was staring at him in disbelief and it caught his attention or what, but he was staring right back at me in a very cold manner. This lasted for a good minute or two until my mom drove off. Went on a hike with my brother and a friend up a butte that didn't have a path, so we had to make our own. The way up was slow since we hiked through thick bushes, so we decided to take a different path on the way down. The path was really rocky with loose gravel that as you stepped, you would slide a few feet each time. Well, one of my steps I started sliding and couldn't stop, and all of the rocks around me were sliding with me towards an edge. Since we didn't come up this way, I had no idea what was beyond the edge. I ended up sliding off the edge of a cliff, falling about 12 feet onto my ass. I thought that I was for sure dead as I was sliding towards that cliff. Oh God, I have about a million spooky stories. So much weird, inexplicable stuff has happened to me over the past 10 years or so. Prepare for a wall of text. I'll try to reformat it if it looks too shitty. Probably the scariest one was when I was 14 and had my 2 best friends sleeping over at my house. My whole family was asleep, but we were still awake in the living room. We had just finished watching a movie, so the lights were still off, and the whole house was quiet. The lights in the living room turned on out of nowhere, and we heard footsteps and whistling down the hall. None of my siblings were home at the time, so I thought for some reason my mom turned on the lights without us seeing her, and that maybe it was her whistling. I walked over to the light switch, which was next to the door that led to the hallway, and saw that it was still in the off position, despite the lights being on. All the doors down the hallway were shut, and none of the lights were on in the rest of the house. My friends and I all started getting freaked out, so we all sat on the couch together trying to figure out what just happened. Then the lights turned off in the living room, but we could see the lights in another room turn on. Together, we walked around the corner to look into the other room, and as I stepped through the doorway, the computer chair quickly turned around and faced our direction. We all flipped our shit and ran back into the living room and hid underneath a blanket. Then we heard footsteps running down the hall, and felt cold breath on the backs of our necks. We started crying and ran to my parents' room, banging on the door until they woke up. One of my friends called her mom to come pick her up, while the other friend and I slept in my parents' bed. My parents still think our imaginations were just getting the better of us, but there's no way we all imagine lights turning on out of nowhere, or chairs moving with nobody else in the room, or stomping down the hall with nobody else awake. This will probably get lost, but here it goes. It was my senior year of high school. On a warm, May evening I was getting ready for bed when I heard yelling coming from outside. I ignored it for about 10 minutes until I crawled into bed. It wasn't long after I closed my eyes that I heard "I wanna fuck you" through my open bedroom window. I was confused, so I got up and looked out my window. There was my neighbor, standing at the fence that divided our yards, looking up at my window. I was pretty freaked out, and I contemplated whether or not I should tell my parents. But it was dark, and I didn't know whether or not he was yelling at me or at someone else that I couldn't see. I didn't know him very well. We had never spoken before. I didn't think there was any real reason to make a fuss over it. The next morning I was home alone, getting ready for school. I see my neighbor putzing around in his yard, and we make awkward eye contact through my living room window. I didn't think anything of it. Close to 8:30 that morning, I hear my dog, tied up in the back of the house, barking, and it started to sound vicious. As I'm in the bathroom, I can hear the back door open. I casually thought, it's just mom, but in the back of my mind I had a strange feeling it was my neighbor. My gut feeling was right. To this day I am so thankful that I had listened to that small voice in the back of my head. We met up in the kitchen. There he was, standing 5 or 6 feet from me, with an 8-inch kitchen knife in his hand. I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked afraid, almost as if he didn't want to go through with what he was going to do. At the same time, he had this crazy look of lust in his eyes. He said, "Don't move." The only thought going through my head was, if you want to live, run. Now. You know when you have those nightmares where someone is chasing after you, but your body just feels really heavy? That's how my body felt at exactly that moment. I wanted to faint, and I'm so glad that I didn't. As I ran out of the house, I remember screaming no. 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 I fell down the front stairs leading up to our porch, got up, and I must have knocked on 2 or 3 different houses before someone finally answered their door. My town's entire police force showed up. The guy ended up going back to his house. I guess he was an unsuccessful recovering alcoholic and had drank 2 liters of vodka the night before. He admitted to the police that he had been watching me through my bedroom window for months. A few summers ago I was out on my boat by myself while I waited for some friends to get to the beach for me to pick them up. In the distance I saw something floating in the water and went over to check it out. When I was about 100 feet or so away I realized that the object was shaped like a hand, but thought, no way. When I got about 50 feet away my heart dropped to my stomach as there was no doubt that it was the shape of a hand. I started thinking, panicking about what I should do as I fully believed I just found a dead body. Should I try and get a line on it and call the Coast Guard? Try and tow it to shore? Try and pull it in the boat in case the person is still alive? You get the idea. I got right up next to it and realized that it was a big orange waterman's glove floating with the fingers up in the air and the rest of the glove submerged. False alarm, but really freaked me out. While I was in elementary school, we had a janitor that was really cool guy. He loved the school and all the kids in it. Turns out he was having problems at home and he ended up killing himself. Exhaust fumes in a garage. Fast forward several years later, and I'm in the 7th grade. I live just behind this school and see it every day. I had some friends from out of town hanging out at my place that weekend. That night, we decided to go to the school at night, around 1 a.m., and just hang around, pointless kid stuff. While we're walking around, one of my friends walks up to one of the windows and is just looking inside. He suddenly gets taken back by something and leans in closer to the window. He flips out and starts yelling at us to run. We all run back to my house. When we get there, he asks me why I didn't tell him that the school had security at night. I told him I never know of this. He said there was a guy sitting in a chair watching him. The man stood up and walked toward the window. That's what caused my friend to tell us to run. But when he started to describe the man, he sounded very familiar. I pulled out a yearbook from my times at the school and asked him to see if he could find the guy. My friend went through the book page by page, not saying a word. Gets to the page with the janitors and points right at the guy who killed himself. I asked if he was sure, but his looks were too distinctive to confuse with someone else. I never told my friend that someone had killed themselves from that school, let alone told him what he looked like. I used to work at a bottle depot, the kind of place that didn't care too much about your personal life. There were a few young guys near my age that I associated with. One of them, Brad, was always getting ripped on by the older guys working there. He had told me he spent some time in prison for assault. I assumed it was because he always got picked on. I was the only person who was nice to him, played guitar with him, showed him some new music, burnt him some CDs. Just being friendly with him. About 2 years later, after I had a new job that was better than the bottle depot, someone brought a newspaper to work and left it on the front desk. I looked at the front page and there were pictures of sex offenders living in the city, and there was Brad. Apparently charged for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. Brad was about 25. Just seeing his stone-faced mug shot staring at me made me feel like puking. I had never felt such a feeling. Now I know why he was always getting verbally abused at work. I thought they called him pedophile as a joke. There was another guy at the same depot who worked there for 2 or 3 weeks, was also charged for raping a handicapped woman. I saw his face on the news and in the paper the next day. We never saw him again. About 5 years ago, when I was visiting with my parents, I kept noticing late at night when I took my dog out it smelled like smoke. No one in my family smoked, and they didn't have any close by neighbors, so it was sort of strange but nothing I thought to get super uppity about. One night around 4:30 in the morning I took my dog out and started walking her down the really long dirt driveway. Towards the end there was a group of pine trees off to the right and a guy was standing there. He said hello and I just said hello back. He asked if I had a cigarette. I did not. Then he wished me a good night and started walking away. The entire time my happy doof dog straining at him to get attention, even after he started to walk away. I immediately started going back up the driveway. Not out of any real fear, but it just felt off. I got a few yards from the house when my dog whipped around, yanking my arm in the process, and started snarling. This gal doesn't really do any emotion other than pure unbridled joy at all times, so that was startling enough. Her yank half spun me in the process. She's not a large dog, about 55 pounds and short, and I turned to find the guy not more than 10 feet from us. He ended up just turning and walking away super casually, and while I don't know his intentions, I can only imagine what they would have been, considering he was following a young girl up a secluded driveway at 4:30 in the morning. I ended up sprinting the rest of the driveway and into the house to wake up my dad. I lived in a house for the first 10 years of my life. As long as I can remember, I kept seeing little white blobs kind of like mist, and I heard sounds from time to time. I was too young to pay any attention to any of it for a couple of years, but once I hit 7 I started to get scared. I began to tell my parents, but they just thought it was my imagination and didn't pay much attention to it. As the years went on, things began to get worse. Doors started slamming, lights started going on randomly, and I began to see shadows. Years went on where I had to keep this to myself since my parents didn't believe me and I figured no one else would. At age 9 I was asked to go get my sister's doll in her room on the other side of the house. I went to go get it, and once I stepped into her room, all her dolls shot from her shell and hit the opposite side wall. I freaked out and told my parents. They believed me this time, and I told them every event until we moved when I was 10. Since I've moved, no strange event has happened to me. I am still freaked out by the memories of my old house. Mine is more scary than spooky. But when I was 16, my brother and I were doing some late night work cleaning up a barn preparing for tobacco season whilst our dad had gone to check on some cattle. I had pulled my Jeep up and was using the headlights to illuminate the barn so we could see what we were doing. The people who owned the house up the road from the barn we were at had several very vicious and aggressive dogs that they would often let roam. I guess attracted to the light, they came into the barn and attacked us. My brother was up in the first tier already moving some tobacco sticks, and I was on the ground handing bundles up. When the dogs came into the barn, at first it was just one, this large German Shepherd, and he stood and just growled, and I stood still with the stick I had in my hand. Soon 3 more dogs emerged from the darkness at either side of my headlights. Because of the shadows you couldn't really see their faces, but you could hear them growling. I had one leg up and my brother threw down an arm and pulled me into the tier just as the dogs ran forward. We climbed up into the second tier and basically stayed there for a few hours with these dogs circling below us. They would leave out of the barn every now and then, but we could hear them outside, and we would toss down a stick and make some racket, but they would rush right back in to see what was going on. After what seemed like forever, we heard a truck coming down the road, and it was our grandfather who had seen the light in the barn whilst driving by and came to check it out, thought it was thieves or something. A few horn honks actually scattered the dogs and we were able to come down and get in my Jeep. About a week later my grandfather was back again feeding some cattle and was attacked by one of the dogs as well, but he was carrying a pistol because of what happened earlier and ended up killing one and wounding another. Still not ghostly or spooky, but definitely scared us bad enough not to work out in the field at night for a long time. Okay, so this is a very personal story which my parents don't really want me to tell people, so that's the reason why I'm telling you Reddit. Okay, so here's some background knowledge. My uncle and my dad are twin brothers. They both grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My dad valued school and going to college while my uncle just wanted to get wasted and have a good time. So when my uncle was in his 20s he got drunk and hit a guy crossing the street. He was convicted on manslaughter and sentenced to 17 years in prison because this wasn't his first attempt. I was about 9 when he got out of prison. Apparently, even though my dad didn't want anything to do with him, he came to our house looking for a place to stay. We couldn't kick him out, so we let him stay. Note: I knew about what he did, not a stupid 9-year-old. My dad told my uncle to get a job to help pay for things. Another note: I'm also a twin. One day my brother and I were being 9-year-olds when my uncle grabbed my brother by the neck and started shaking him like crazy. Being confused as shit, I ran up there, kicked him in the nuts as hard as I can. Lol, he fell down the stairs. So I locked me and my brother in a room until my parents came home. My uncle then decided to tell my parents he was going to kill them. So my parents freaked out, locked all of us in my parents' room with a gun. In the morning my parents sent him to the Star of Hope. This is my favorite part. My uncle also had this sick hallucination that my dad had millions of dollars locked away and that he somehow owed him some. So he sued my dad twice and my mom once. It's been about 5 years and I haven't heard from him since. A few years back, when I was 8, my little brother, 5 at the time, and me were playing in the car while we waited for my mom to get off the phone so we could go to the pool. It was a sweltering summer day, and we didn't get to go to the pool often, so me and my brother were ecstatic. While waiting for my mom, we decided it was a good idea to play in the trunk of the car. It was one of the older models of a Honda sedan, and I took the liberty of locking my brother in first. Our signal to let each other out was to start screaming, so it's my turn, and I don't trust my brother enough to find the release switch in the driver's seat and let me out. So me being the genius I am, decide to lock him in with me. As soon as the trunk shut, I knew we were in deep shit. 20 minutes later, my mom finally gets off the phone and come outside to hear banging and screaming coming from the trunk. We were both fine, physically, but my brother wouldn't stop shaking and was albino pale. Needless to say, we were all looking forward to the pool even more than before. About a year ago, I was hanging out with my girlfriend at her house, just talking and passing the time. We were sitting at one end of her couch, which, due to the design of her house, looks straight down a hallway that runs the length of the house. At the far end of the hall, her older brother's bedroom door was half open. We'd been there for a few hours before we realized that it was getting decently dark in the house. Not too dark to see, but dark enough to set the creepy mood. During a relatively longer period of silence, she looks over near the hallway and asks if I heard something. After a few more seconds, I realized that there was a steady rhythm of tapping coming from near the hall. Not the even tick of a clock, but a legitimate rhythm. We started to talk about anything, just to cover the noise. Half an hour-ish later, a light turned on in the hallway. One of those little motion-activated nightlights, plugged in halfway down the hall. We figured it must have been one of their cats, as they had two. Over on the other end of the couch was one of them, so we'd narrowed it down to her large white cat. As if on cue, her other cat walks out of the kitchen, directly next to us. Not next to us near the hallway, or even remotely in view of the light. To this day, I don't know what caused that light to turn on. I still consider it to be one of the most terrifying moments of my life, only because I can't find any explanation for it. So a few years ago, some friends and I had just wrapped up a scary movie night in someone's dorm, and because of the lateness of the hour, we decided to just crash in the dorm. I was on the floor with some other people while my friend and his roommate took the bunk beds. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I didn't have my glasses on, so I was fumbling around for them on the floor when I suddenly got that eerie feeling that something was watching me. I froze, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shape perched on the foot of my friend's bed on the top bunk, leaning over, staring straight down at me. I slowly turned my head just a little to get a look at it, and it looked like the little kid from The Grudge, one of the movies we'd just watched, but draped in shadow. What disturbed me the most was that everyone else was seemingly oblivious. Dead quiet. My friend, on whose bed the thing was sitting, didn't make so much as a peep. I was too terrified to move or even call out, so the night wore on with me staring at it, and it leaning over the bed staring at me, until dawn broke. When light came, I screwed up my courage, snatched my glasses up and put them on, and then turned around to face the thing. It was a fucking black metallic balloon my friend had gotten earlier that night. Okay, this is kind of long, but it's creepy. So a few years ago I shared an apartment with my coworker Matt and his girlfriend Jordy. None of us have been paranoid about the supernatural or were into ghosts and all that. All the bedrooms and my bathroom connected from one hallway which was opposite the kitchen. Jordy was in the kitchen cooking something and I was in my room. Out of nowhere she calls my name in a shaky voice and says, "Are you in your room right now?" I came out and was like, "Yeah, what's up?" She said, I swear, I just saw someone out of the corner of my eye that looked like a naked man walk from your bathroom to the living room, but when I peeked in the living room there was no one there. I knew she wasn't the type to make up stories, so we were quiet for a minute, then we heard stuff fall in the bathtub. Scared the crap out of us, but it was just my razor and razor holder that fell from the wall. Stupid suction cups never hold worth a crap. A few weeks later, Matt and I both had the morning shift at our job, so we decided to just ride together. I walked into the dark living room at 6:30 in the morning and turned on the light and saw the new, unopened box of cat litter I had just purchased, sitting smack in the middle of the living room floor. Normally I store all the litter under the dining room table. There's no way a cat can move a 20-pound box, so I was puzzled. Matt came into the living room a few minutes later and I pointed at the box and asked if he moved it. He said no, so we were both spooked and he woke Jordy up to ask if she had moved it. She said no as well. Neither of them were sleepwalkers either. So I moved it back under the table and we went to work. 2 nights later, same thing happened and it was moved to the same spot. Jordy started really freaking out, but that was the last incident. Also related, the street lamp right outside our building always flickered and went out whenever we would drive up and walk by it, but when we passed it, it would come back on. We decided it was a naked ghost that hated cats and went to live in the lamp. One more thing. After we had moved out and I was living with someone else, I told one of my girlfriends about that story and her eyes got wide and she told me she never felt comfortable and something just didn't feel right in that apartment the few times she visited us. Still creeps me out to this day. This never sounds nearly as scary as it really was, but I love telling this story. So my younger sister and I went up to visit my aunt up in the mountains of TN, about 10 miles from Sewanee. We were out in the middle of nowhere in my aunt's friend's gorgeous 2-story log cabin. It was just the 3 of us. The owner of the house was traveling and wanted us to house sit. It's the middle of June and hot as hell, and unfortunately the upstairs doesn't have air conditioning, so my sister and I opted to sleep in the living room downstairs, while my aunt took the master bedroom that was also downstairs. I slept just fine, but my sister apparently didn't sleep a wink because she kept hearing footsteps coming from above her. I chalked it up to her just being really tired, maybe the wood was settling or whatever it is that people say. A few days later, we go to the university's little bar/restaurant place for dinner. By the time we get back to the house, it's 9 or 10 p.m. and it's dark, so we all go into the house. I sit down and plug my phone in and pick up a book and start reading while my sister goes and changes into her sleepy clothes. My aunt is freaking out and keeps saying that all of the doors are open when she knows she closed them. Alright, maybe it was the dogs. She then heads into the kitchen and says that all of the cabinet doors are open, which is really weird because they're the magnetic type that you have to push to open. She's flipping out and says something like, I wonder if, never mind. I said, you wonder what? What is it? Well, the house is built either really close or on top of a Cherokee burial ground, and we have Cherokee blood in his. And boom, the fucking power goes out. We ended up going into town and getting a hotel. It was kind of funny after we realized that we were being ridiculous, but we were not going to stick around to find out what it was that made the power go out.